So thanks, Ben. Thanks for reaching out. Thanks for getting this started off the ground. And, I'm really interested to have this conversation with you. I know you and I have chatted a little bit in the past. And, I think we share a lot of philosophies that are very similar in, what it's like to be a warrior, what it's like to be somebody in the profession of emergency services. So without further ado, man, let's get this started.
Great. First, I'm going to just open up a little sponsorship here. Direct Action Combat Performance sponsoring the podcast there. Check them out for all your training and self-defense needs.
Right on. It's looking good on you, buddy. You're making that look good.
So, why don't we just start off with what you think is one of the biggest driving issues of, we'll just speak to maybe men's mental health issues today.
Yeah. So, this is a good time for the conversation. I know back in June was mental health month. And I don't know about you, but I feel like it was kind of, it was shadowed, I guess, by the LGBTQ community, which, there's nothing wrong with that, but there wasn't a lot of talk or discussion about men's health. And I think it's a shame because there are a lot of guys that we know in every profession, every industry that are suffering in one capacity or another. And I believe that I do believe this to the core of my being. I think the contributing factor to men not speaking up is the stigma. There's still a large stigma that is involved with, I don't want to look like I'm weak, or I don't want to look like I'm a burden to somebody else. So guys will harness that internally and they'll keep that inside, which is an unfortunate truth. But that's what I've noticed in the past few years.
Yeah, I'd agree. I've been there as well, and I've had coworkers that have mentioned their own issues and struggles. And when I recognize then my own personal ones and I go to speak about it, there's still a hesitation there thinking, oh, is this going to inhibit my career progression? Is this going to inhibit the opportunities I have at work if I'm away from work or taking a break because of the ongoing stress or whatever the issue is? There's so much hesitation there, and that's still present despite the beginnings of conversations we're having over this.
Yeah, the knock-on effect where some guys will think, well, if I bring this up and, I put my hand up and say, hey, man, I just need to take a knee for a week or even maybe just a day. Maybe it's just an afternoon. There is the concern of consequences, the ramification. How will our peers look at us, or how will my superior view this? And is there going to be a negative backlash to, putting your hand up and saying, hey, man, like I'm under pressure right now based on who knows what the reasons are that trigger that. So I think first and foremost, a way to combat such a mindset and a way to provide an outlet for folks would be, how like in most professions you do either an annual or maybe even a semi-annual check-in or qualification refresher, no matter what that might be. So where I used to work, every year we would do, you do a fitness test every year. That's an annual fitness test that everyone has to meet a standard. You do a shooting test every year. You would have to do that minimum standard. And, there are other things that are involved where I think a mental check-in would also be a value added annual checkup where you have psychiatrists that are available, and it's not a nice to have, it's a mandatory thing where, there's less stigma that involved. You walk into the psych house, you talk to the professionals, they have a series of questions based on their professional opinion and understanding of the operational realities. And then that becomes the norm. So, fitness test, check, shooting test, check, mental health check, it's all in there. So I think that would be one way to help build a culture of acceptance for guys to know that, hey, man, you don't, this is not a choice. You don't get to choose, if, it's just a matter of when. So you're going to do it at some point throughout this year, and that's your mental health check-in. I think that would be a way to implement a positive cultural change.
Yeah, absolutely. And stay ahead of it. Like we do everything else in our respective jobs to continue performing at the level we want to perform. And we understand that there are times we need to push down on the gas pedal and times to let off it in your physical pursuits, your skills development, everything else. But yet when it comes to just your emotional health and mental well-being, for some reason we think we got to throw that on the back burner and focus on everything else, when really that is, if that's not where it's supposed to be in a healthy place, it's going to cause profound after effects on every other piece of what we need to do our job. And so I think it's really just transferring that idea into the emotional health and mental well-being aspect, and using the same strategies we do to keep our physical health at top notch and our skills at the highest level.
I agree. So, we don't need to reach too far to come up with examples where if we are, mentally, psychologically fatigued or under pressure, we will either tactically or technically sometimes make mistakes. And we're trying to minimize how many mistakes we make as a profession in, the medical field like yourself, or, the profession of arms like my previous place of employment, where technically and tactically we have a cognitive reality of making a sharp decision at the right time under, a myriad of different pressures that may be coming from external factors in every day-to-day life. So where I'm going with that is, if there's a guy that's already working at a deficit because he's dealing with something from the past, or he's dealing with something that's maybe acute, maybe for an example, him and his wife are, they're in a bit of a rough patch. Well, if we don't ask those questions, he may not bring forward that information. So if he's carrying that to work and there's a burden mentally, cognitively, because of something that's happening at home, the onus is on the member to bring that forward, but then the onus is on guys that they're working with to ask questions like, hey man, everything okay at home? How's your little guy doing? How's your daughter doing? And if the answer from the member is, yep, everything's good, but that's a lie, then the onus is on the member to own that. And I think that could be a healthy transition to a culture where it's like, hey man, I'm just having an off day. And maybe you're going to bounce back tomorrow, all good. But maybe that issue that is beginning as an acute becomes a chronic, and then over time, mentally beat down, cognitively at a an exhausted fatigue level. And then of course, there's going to be, more tactical and technical skills that will also be affected by that. So I guess a more openness on the member, if they're dealing with something, to say, hey man, I need to talk to somebody, or I just need to shift my focus temporarily here. But also from a like a tribal kind of togetherness environment, when you work really closely with guys, you can tell when they're off. You can tell, like, when a guy's just not himself. So for me, that's a red flag. When we notice that, as an empathetic person who is a professional warrior, being part of a warrior is not just turning it off and pretending like it doesn't happen. It's addressing those more sensitive type of subjects that a lot of us will try to avoid from from time to time, whether it's because of a fear of how we're going to be viewed, or maybe it's just in some cases, guys are not really sure what questions to ask. So maybe they want to help, but they're not even sure where to start. So I think maybe a little bit of education on that piece would be value added as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, the mandatory, adding that in as a mandatory checkpoint, like a wellness check, mental well-being check, is essential to kind of build that into the system where you can't really avoid it, the way you can avoid any other assessments or skill-based testing that's required of your job. But that's the first place to start. And we know that, like, you're talking to a psychiatrist, psychologist, there's always going to be a little bit of a barrier there, because you're doing different things, and there's someone in kind of a position of power, and you're there as kind of a patient. But when it comes to you and your team and the people that you work alongside every day, everyone's doing the same job. Everyone's trying to accomplish the same mission. Everyone has a home life outside of work. And those are the people that are going to understand and be able to help you the most. Like you said, and I've seen this with my partners. You get in the truck at the start of a shift, and instantaneously if you've been working with this individual that there's something off, and there's no sense in hiding it. Once, like I've been there, I've withheld stuff because I just want to keep behind me and get the job done, and it affects your work. And the other person notices, and you're just like pushing a big boulder up the hill, versus getting out of the way right away. Then your team can help you out. Everyone can kind of step up and take on a little bit of extra load, and you don't like. I think so many of these issues, people think that it's their issue to deal with on their own and they got to fix it. But until you talk about something, you don't realize that another person on your team or a friend or maybe going through the exact same thing. Like I just went through this with our newborn, with the complex medical issues that he has. And, when you start talking about things, and it took me a little bit to talk about it, people come out of the woodwork and everyone has these hidden experiences that you never know about. And all of a sudden you have a community of individuals that are giving you amazing advice. They're being a sounding board, and the weight is lifted off your shoulders. And it's just, I think it's finding a way to breach that barrier and take that first step of open discussion. And it's hard to believe how much easier things get.
I agree with you 100%. And I think, a lot of what you're suggesting here has a lot to do with trust. And, when we have a level of trust built with someone that we work with, we should, feel a little bit more comfortable opening up in those situations. So, trust isn't something that we just hand out. That's kind of earned and garnished over time. But I agree with you 100%. People want to help. Generally speaking, people are good and they want to help. So when you extend a hand or reach out to somebody, people will often, like you said, either give good advice, or if nothing else, just be a sounding board. And I'll give you two examples. I still stay in contact with probably about 10 or 15 guys that are still active at the unit. And there's probably 4 or 5 guys that still come to train with me on a pretty regular basis when they're around. And I believe some of these guys train with me not because I'm giving them these wicked skills. I believe it's because of the camaraderie and the level of trust. So sometimes these guys will come train with me. It's less about breaking a sweat and the technical stuff that we cover on the mat. It's more about the conversations that we have before and after. And I can tell you, Ben, I've had guys literally just vent. They vent for almost, the full hour, and they're just getting stuff off their chest. And I'm glad that they chose me to do that. And I don't take it as a burden at all. In fact, I'm honored that they even feel that trust to do so. And what I realize is I think they feel comfortable venting with me because I understand what they're going through. I went through it myself. I come from that background. But also the big one is there's no judgment. I'm now an outsider. I'm no longer part of that organization, but I understand it. So guys feel comfortable with opening up a little bit, venting a little bit, knowing that there's no negative backlash. And I'm very proud to be able to do that for these guys because it's important. So there's a few guys I still stay in contact with, and I'll just as you mentioned a few minutes ago, I'll just back up a little bit about trying to take care of it myself. So I went through a dark period in early 2000. So I recently left the unit in late 2019. Had a couple of months to get things in motion with the business. And January 2020 hit the ground running. Had a contract with the RCMP, went really well. Had a contract with my old unit, which was awesome. That went really well. And then March, as everybody knows, March 2020, wheels stopped turning and nobody was training, nobody was moving. And I went through a really dark patch that lasted about 2 weeks where I was struggling to reconnect with my new identity. I was struggling with missing the unit, missing the guys at the unit. I was struggling with my decision, questioning whether or not I should have left. I questioned whether or not I should try to get back in the military. So I was really struggling. So compile that with the pressures of trying to get a business off the ground, in addition to homeschooling at that point, 11-year-old. There was a lot going on for sure. And I tell you, there were moments, Ben, where I would be out for a drive and I would look at specific ditches in the road that I want to bury my truck into. And and I don't mind sharing this. The more I talk about it, the more comfortable I'm getting with it. I didn't want to kill myself, but I wanted to hurt myself. I wanted somebody just to take care of me. I wanted the noise to stop. I just wanted everything to go numb. And I thought, well, if I just jam this truck into a ditch, I'll probably be messed up enough where I'll be intensive care and I'll be feeding through a tube. This stuff went through my head. Now, here's the scary part. Those voices in my head started to get louder and louder. So I thought about reaching out to some guys at the unit, but I was struggling with trust. I was struggling with who can I trust? Who can I reach out to that I know is not going to judge me? And of course, there was a list of guys that I could have called. I know that, but I had a hard time getting over the hurdle because of what was going on in my head was, how will I be viewed? Will I be viewed as broken? Will I be viewed as used goods? Also, I didn't want to be a burden to anybody. I didn't want to bring my stuff onto somebody else because everybody else is dealing with something else. So all these things went through my head. So there was about 2 weeks where I was trying to combat against this, and then finally, what I did was, so early in my relationship with my wife and my little girl, I'll just give you a little bit of backdrop. My little girl is my wife's daughter from a previous relationship. So I came into her world when she was 2. And, as we kind of grew up together, I realized that my style of parenting was very militant and very direct. So I thought it would be a good idea to reach out to a child psychologist and request some coaching on just how to be a good dad. So I did a couple sessions with a child psychologist, and it was literally for me to be coached on, certain things to say to a daughter, certain things not to say, so there's no negative repercussions when she's in her teenage years. So this was a few years ago. Now fast forward, I'm in the middle of COVID. I'm struggling. I'm in a dark place. I didn't know who to reach out to, so I called her. So I called her and I said, listen, I don't know what's going on, but I know I'm struggling right now. And that was about maybe 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. And she said, give me a few minutes. I have somebody that I think you could talk to. So I hung up the phone, and literally about 10 minutes later, the phone rang and I was speaking to a psychologist in British Columbia. So 10 o'clock in Ottawa, that's 7 a.m. 7 a.m. She called me and she said, hey, I've been given your information by so-and-so. What do you want to talk about? And, it felt so good. So we chatted for about 45 minutes. And at the end of it, I just got a few things off my chest. She helped me navigate why the thoughts were entering my head, what is, maybe the potential triggers, and, a few little nuggets on how to combat against it. And honestly, she didn't give me anything that was like, life changing, but what she gave me was a safe haven outlet where I could speak freely with no judgment. And I think that's all I needed, because I hung up the phone. I went into my room. I cried for probably like 5 or 10 minutes, like a weeping little person. And I was back on track. And, I'm glad that happened. And I'm also glad that we're having this conversation, because I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know who to talk to. And part of that was on me, because I know that there's guys that I could call in a heartbeat, and I know they'd be here for me. The problem was me making that call because I didn't want to be a burden to somebody else.
Yeah, and I think that is a perfect, true testament to what your brain can do with that level of stress, where it's like a short circuit of your brain tries to, you're under so much stress and it's not getting put out there to any outlet, and the option that your brain tells itself is it needs to shut it down, and that's how you end up with these suicidal ideations. And I don't know what the professionals, psychologists and psychotherapists will say about the mechanisms, but I mean, based on what you have said and what I've experienced on my own journey, and just unfortunately dealing with lots of patients at work with suicide attempts and ideations and suicides, you see the same pattern over and over again. And I felt that it's you think that your brain convinces itself that you're actually doing something good for the people around you, by looking towards these suicidal ideations, and you're somehow decreasing the burden on other people, and taking this route that will lower the stress in a different way, for everyone around you. And I mean, there's a lot of people have opinions on suicide and depression, and I think if you have firsthand experience with it, I've seen the same thing over and over again. I think a lot of people think that their brain has convinced themselves that they're doing something good. And I mean, we know that with PTSD, like they've shown in the literature that there are like brain matter changes similar to what you see in dementia or Alzheimer's or from traumatic brain injury. Like it's not just it's a physical or physiological problem as well, especially when it gets to that degree. And trying to make sure I don't go on too much of a ramble here, but yeah, it's exactly what you said, is that I've felt that same pattern myself. And I've only felt that when the times when I look back and reflect, when I haven't said anything to anyone and I'm just trying to put the hammer down, get back to work, try to be efficient as possible, and you end up being the opposite of efficient. And the only other option for your brain is to shut itself down by driving into a ditch or whatever option there is. And like you said as well, the minute you open up and talk to someone and your brain starts outletting that to a sounding board, it's boom, it's all gone.
Yeah.
And all the brain chemicals release, you feel way better. And it's like, all of a sudden it's like a problem went from being the biggest problem in the world that you can't overcome to like nothing. And you can't believe how fast that happens. But like you said, I had no coaching or knowledge on how to deal with that. It's easy to say like, oh, just talk to someone, talk about it, all these things. But if you're in an environment where that's not the norm, and you grew up in a time when that wasn't the norm, saying just talk about it, it's easy to say, it's very difficult to execute on.
Yeah, I agree. It is it's difficult to execute because we need to commit. We have to have the courage to commit to execute that conversation. And, that will happen with somebody that's trusted. Like we all have that person, right? Where, at a moment's notice, at a heartbeat, they would drop what they're doing and they'd be there for you. That's the type of trust that I'm talking about. And the onus is on us to make that phone call or, to drive over and see them, whatever it might be. I've got a really good buddy of mine who, I think we are incapable of having small talk conversations. Like oftentimes when we get together, it goes deep, it goes philosophical. And I tell you, every time we hang out, I feel like rejuvenated, and it's,
Yeah.
It's like, I talked to you about it before, when we're part of a tribe, it's like this, and we both have two cups, right? So you're part of my tribe. Every now and again, I've got to fill your cup. Right? I got to help you out. But, a little bit of give and a little bit of take, as part of a tribesman, there's times where you're going to fill my cup as well, so there's got to be a little bit of rapport, give and take given. And that's what I believe is important about surrounding yourself with. They don't necessarily have to be the like-minded people, although that helps because the conversation tends to be a little bit more genuine, but at least people that have good intentions. So you surround yourself with good people, because I think if we surround ourselves with good people who are willing to listen and, provide some feedback, we would probably lean less on other coping mechanisms like, the obvious drugs and alcohol, which, as you know, is just a downward spiral effect. Like, don't get me wrong, man. I like to have a few pints every now and again. But when I'm struggling, the last thing I want to do is numb my senses with alcohol and then potentially make a very poor decision.
Yeah, and actually, I was right before I went off work for our newborn, we had an unfortunate call with a newborn baby that went into cardiac arrest, and we were debriefing after the call, and one of our peer support team members from our dispatch, who had been in the U.S. military as well and gone overseas, he came and came to our debrief, and he just mentioned, we were debriefing, he just mentioned as well, like when you go through a traumatic event or a super stressful time and you bring any substance or alcohol into that recovery period afterwards, it associates that substance or that beverage with that traumatic memory. And so it gets, which I wasn't aware of this, but
Yeah.
now when you go to that substance in your brain, it's associated with that. It gets easier and easier to bring that back in versus you have that traumatic experience or that stressful state, and you, in recovery, you go and speak to people or go for a run and go for a walk in the woods. Now you're not only doing something much healthier for your brain to process that and to reprogram your brain chemicals, but you're associating that with a good activity and a healthy activity, and you're building the habits. Like, we know that there's a really good book called Atomic Habits where the author mentions, you can't get rid of a bad habit. You have to rewire a new one that's actually stronger. So the minute you allow that little habit, like even just one beer after a bad call or a bad stressful time, you're building the habit where that's where you go to with a traumatic memory, which was a little tidbit of information that I wasn't aware of. And I thought was, wow, like that needs to be spoken about a lot more, because
I agree with you 100%, man. I didn't know that either. And that makes perfect sense. And you know what? Like, I'm not a psychologist or a psychotherapist. I do find this stuff fascinating. So I do dabble with studies and try to, get a little bit smarter on this. I didn't know that. But one thing that I try to do myself and also provide a little bit of advice for folks is when they're in a bit of a speed wobble, maybe they're going through a tough time. What I share with guys is do something that makes your heart happy. Like, just do that activity, whether, it's a hike in the woods with your dog, or whether you really enjoy skydiving or whatever that thing is, but do that thing that makes your heart happy and do it guilt-free. Like, don't worry about, you're cutting into this time or that time. Take an hour, take a half a day and do something that makes you happy. And this is really good information. I didn't know that, Ben, but it makes perfect sense. It makes 100%, 100% sense in terms of rewiring the brain. We know neuroplasticity is a thing. We know that we can overcome bad habits and we can create new ones that are more positive. What would you suggest based on the literature that you've read to help guys? Like, what would you suggest to help rewire the brain in this particular topic that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm not an expert on this by any means. I've just done a lot of experimenting on my own, and you see trends in the workplace. And I mean, it like, if you're police or fire department or medic, you know how it is. Everyone's joking about it all the time, joking about being an alcoholic or whatever it is, but those are only jokes because it's a very strong pattern in the workplace.
Right.
But no, I think it comes down to awareness and recognition that, why is this a problem in the community? We know it's a problem in the community because, like, why is this divorce, whatever you want to name, a problem in the community? It's because the work is inherently stressful, and it's inherently stressful because humans are not, I believe that humans are not designed to see these things chronically for a long time. Like chronically over and over and over again without a break. Like we have these inherent, natural, innate ability to deal with stress and all the hormones that get released to help us deal with stress. But it's when we look at how the body deals with those things, it has an amazing mechanism to deal with a huge spike in stress, deal with the problem, and then come back down and relax again.
Right.
And on my own journey, like when I look back at my work environment, and this will probably put me on another tangent, but I think it's very simple. Listening to podcasts with veterans, and you compare like police officers or anyone in emergency services on the civilian side and people being deployed. It's obviously very different environments, but if you, like myself, if I work in a city like Toronto and I go and do my 4 shifts and I go home and I have 2 days off, like my office is still around me all the time. I go for a walk, I go for a run. I'm seeing where I did the call. I'm seeing calls happening. You're seeing all these things. And so you're not really leaving the workplace. You're kind of, and yeah, this is going to be a whole nother tangent on conditioning and everything, but we can get to that after. So when I think about like, what can you do? I think it's awareness of why there's a problem. And as a human, even if you're really good at your job, I consider myself to be good at my job, but you need to separate and detach from that. And you need to build healthy habits that allow you to do so. And there's nothing wrong. You need to go and decompress with your coworkers and people that understand. And I know that alcohol and drinks will be a part of that, but you need to be aware that that can become a problem very easily. And yeah, build healthy habits. Maybe you guys meet up on days off and walk your dogs in the woods, or whatever you want to do on your own time too, to be away from people. I know I have to do that. I need a break from people. And once you start building those habits, it's easier and easier. If you wake up the day after work and you're tired because it's been a long shift, you've got hammered. If you have that habit, it's that much easier, like anything else, to get out of bed and go and do that and take those first few steps that'll make you start feeling better. And it gets easier and easier. It's the momentum and keeping that ball rolling. And it keeps you on track.
Absolutely, man. I agree with you 100%. Behaviors, like, sometimes we may say or do something that is out of our character, right? So we make a poor decision once in a while. We slip up and maybe a verbal slip every once in a while. That's going to happen. We're human. We're far from perfect. But what's interesting is if we're aware of it and we know how that makes us feel, then we are more cognizant to correct that behavior in a future circumstance that's very similar. And the reason I mention that is because, habitual behaviors are developed over time when we are aware. So, there's a saying that I like to use is be where your feet are. So, some people will refer to it as mindfulness. Some people refer to it as meditation. I refer to it as being in the present moment. So if you are aware that we just slipped up or said something that was outside of our character and it made you feel a certain way, then that's a good thing because you acknowledge it. But if we are so busy and we don't even realize that we just said something to insult somebody, whether it's by accident or not, then that's more problematic. And that's where good friends who you trust can step in and be like, hey, man, is everything okay? Because that's totally outside of your character, right? Like, I always crack up a little bit when guys I used to work with, somebody would say or do something, and then because we're pretty hard on each other, like, we're in a good way, but every now and again I'd hear something negative, like, man, that guy's a fucking idiot. It's like, whoa, like he made a mistake, man. Like he's a human being at the end of the day. He's not an idiot, but it comes out that way because, just guys are pretty harsh. And it's not intended to be harsh, guys. That's my point that I'm trying to bridge the gap. It's not intended to be harsh, but we have to be careful with what we say and how we say it because there is a knock-on effect where, a guy makes a mistake on a Monday, it's forgotten about on Tuesday. But if he makes the same mistake on Monday and on Tuesday and on Wednesday, it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Now there's a habitual behavior here that needs to be acknowledged. So yeah, like, cutting each other break a little bit is a good thing,
Yeah. And I think like accountability is, like, especially in a tight knit team or, people that you work closely with in these environments. I don't know what it's like in your in the teams you were a part of, but I mean, people eat their own too, you know, and you know, you need a level of accountability. They're high stakes jobs, and people's lives are on the line, and you know, everyone needs to be on top of their game. But at the same time, like, yeah, if there's a trend and there's a pattern, you know, it needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with in a healthy way,
Right.
because you can have like yourself, like amazing at your job, a great reputation, you know, someone that's respected. But again, if no one's talking about anything and you have these things going on at home and you're suffering in your own head and you make a mistake because you're suffering because you haven't talked to anyone, and then someone, you know, says, you're an idiot, why are you doing that? Then, you know, you are someone that normally wouldn't, you'd be able to like bounce back and kind of and shoot back at that guy, but now you're in a really vulnerable state and no one knows about it, and all of a sudden now that's the trigger point and the tipping point that sets you over the edge. And again, nobody knows about it, because they're just, you're just shooting the shit and you're getting after each other like always, but you're in a vulnerable state. And I think especially in these environments of you're in the military and emergency services, I've felt that with myself when I haven't dealt with my own internal things, and I'm with my team that I respect and you know, love like family, and I do make a stupid mistake and someone reps on me, and because I'm in that vulnerable state, I'm like, man, like I'm an idiot, and then I just go into this. You go into this rhythm of negative self talk,
Yes.
and that's not who you are. That doesn't normally harm you, but again, if no one's aware, if people are aware, they're going to be stepping up to back you up rather than kind of shoot you down to hold you accountable. And that goes back to the same principle of the same way we keep ourselves accountable with our physical health and skills and our workplace responsibilities. We have to keep each other accountable in a healthy way, just by sharing and helping each other outside of work, because we know that it doesn't matter if you're the top person on the team, like eventually something's going to get to you either in your personal life or in the workplace, and everyone has their vulnerabilities. And like an example that hit hard to me was when I was going a couple of years ago in the middle of the pandemic, or right when the pandemic started. I was going through my advanced care paramedic training, and it's full-time school course load, and I'm working full-time, and then the pandemic hit at the same time. So like you were going through with your business, everything's up in the air, and everyone's trying to MacGyver everything.
Right.
And I'm in that program. I mean, full-time work alone is enough, but then doing this full-time course load, and you have to, you know, like you have to learn a skill at the beginning of the week and you have to master it by the end of the week. And if you don't, then you're kind of out. And I had two guys in the course that I was really close with, and both of them, I'm like thinking, you know, like they're absolute studs. They're so smart. They're fit, you know, they're good looking. They're like the best people you can have. And the whole time I'm in my mind, I'm playing catch up to these guys, and I'm looking at them as, you know, they're a tier above me, and I'm just trying to play catch up. And you know, like 6 months later, after we had graduated and we were working and we are catching up, I found out that one of these guys had a suicide attempt. And I mean, thank God he's still with us. But that whole time, like we all talked about how hard the course was and managing work and all the BS and trying to balance everything out. But in addition to that, you know, he was looking at us, the other two guys, like we're studs and we're a step above him. And everyone's kind of talking a little bit about how hard it is, but no one's actually talking about what's going on behind scenes.
Right.
And I was in the same boat to him to a degree. And if we had both chatted about it on a deeper level and kind of got into it more, you know, it probably would have saved us 6 months of mental anguish, respectively. And we would have avoided a lot of pain and suffering if we had just dived into it a bit more and taken the time to say, hey man, how are you actually really managing all this? You know?
I agree, man. Like being a warrior, being anyone that wants to consider themselves even a part of being a warrior is, there's a physical aspect for sure, but there's also a social intelligence and an emotional intelligence to being a warrior, where it's okay to be a little bit vulnerable. It's okay to show true colors, and especially when you're in the presence of somebody that you trust and respect, that would be the time to open up a little bit. One thing I pride myself on with, being a pretty empathetic person is like, I don't tolerate, I don't tolerate the weakness and the nonsense of the small stuff, but I'm very empathetic, like in terms of recognizing when somebody is off a little bit. But I will be honest with you, like some people hold their cards, very, very close to their chest, and those reads are not as prevalent or obvious as others. And an example that I'll give you is a buddy of mine that I used to work with. In mid-May, he committed suicide, and he's a beauty of a human being, and nobody really saw that coming because he's such a positive guy. He really looks, he looked at the world as cups half full, optimistic, held his cards really close to his chest. In fact, like I literally spoke to him a week before he committed suicide, and we had plans to get together shortly thereafter. And I'll tell you, I beat myself up a little bit when I look back through my cell phone, and he sent a message to me a few days prior to, um, and I didn't look at it at the time, so it was on a signal feed, so I didn't look at it at the time because the notifications were turned off. And he sent a message to me, and I don't know if that was him reaching out, but I feel terrible that I didn't see it until after he had committed suicide. Would I have been able to walk him off the ledge? I don't know. But where I'm going with that is some guys, you can tell when something's off canter a little bit. Some guys you cannot. So if we think there's something wrong, it's on us to ask questions and get the guy to open up. At the same time, as a warrior, we can only bury things so deep before it becomes, negative consequences will rise to the surface. So we need to be courageous enough to be vulnerable and have those hard conversations and be okay with the fact that you're not okay. It's okay to not be okay. And then, you surround yourself with good people and get yourself back on track and yeah, just take one day at a time and do the things that make us happy.
Yeah, and it literally, it's I came into the job when I was young, like 20 years old, and I came to the big city, and you're looking at these people 10 years ahead of you, and they're kind of your heroes in the job. And I'm sure you had that in your job. You come onto a new team, a new environment, and these people that have been there, and they're absolutely killing it, and they're the pillars, the epitome of what you want to be when you first start training. And then people, if they're not talking about it, and again, it's I mean, I can talk about the workplace afterwards, but it's not on them that, it's not their fault that they haven't talked about it. It's the whole culture. But if you don't see them saying, hey, like I was away for 6 months because I need to step away from the workplace. My brain wasn't in the right spot. My head wasn't in the right spot. I needed to reset so I can be effective at work. If that's not coming from the people that you look up to in your workplace or in your friend group or whoever, then it's likely that you're going to take the same path as them, and
Yep.
and I remember people that I looked up to, they'd disappear for a bit, they'd come back, disappear for a bit, come back, and just keep killing it, just doing amazing at their job, and you're just like, oh, I guess they were off or on vacation or something, but and they're back to just being amazing at their job again, and and then when it comes to like you going, like I remember going to just this crazy violent call where there was just, messed up things that happen to people, and your partner looks at you and he says, okay, you good? And you're like, I guess, like, I don't know. I mean, I just saw human bodies the way I'm not supposed to see them, but yeah, I guess we'll just go and do another call again. But you don't really know what to do, because there's no example of what you should do other than, I guess I'll just go back to work, because there's endless work. And that's the thing. And I can only speak, I've only ever worked in kind of emergency services, and the work is never stopping. And so unless there's a system in place where you can pull yourself out of it, and we're getting better in developing systems the way we spoke about it in the beginning a bit, but unless that system is in place, if you're someone that, which typically these jobs attract in the military and emergency services, if someone that's a hard worker and a go-getter, then your obvious choice is going to be, okay, I guess I'll get back to work.
Yeah.
And I'll push that behind me. And you can only do that so much until the effects start happening. And I mean, for me, I personally didn't struggle with substances, but for me, I got to a point where I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to leave the house. I'd spend my 4 days off going to the gym, back to my house, and not talking to anyone, not wanting to leave the house, not calling my friends, people that I typically would enjoy talking to for hours. I didn't want to run into anyone on the street, not even in casual conversation. And I remember being in like Shoppers Drug Mart and someone's tapping on my shoulder to ask an innocent question if I know where something is, and I'm looking at my shoulder like, what are you asking me for? You're in like this hyper defensive state. And I didn't even realize it until I'd stepped away from work long enough to feel myself again and feel my normal self. And kind of going on a tangent there, but we need the systems in place first and the examples in place, which, is what we're trying to do. Just talk about it casually.
Yes.
Because and I have imposter syndrome here, but if by chance there's anyone in my workplace or anywhere that paramedic student or something that looks up to me as some big tough guy that's good at my job and sees that, oh yeah, like, man, that call messed him up. He took a time away from work so he could maintain his health and then come back to work and still be effective, then maybe I can do that too.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing we can do is show an example, and then work to build that habit throughout the teams that we work in, and then put the systems in place so that people don't slip through the cracks.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And, to help each other out, like we often do a pretty good job of doing a debrief afterwards. So, what did we see? What did we do? What would we do differently? That's typically the 3 questions that I would ask anybody that's involved in a legitimate situation that I'm involved with them. What do we see? What do we do? And what would we do differently next time? Once we've had that discussion, if there's something in the back of the head that keeps coming to the forefront of your thought process. A tool that I use that I've started implementing probably about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago is when those thoughts are waking me up at night and those thoughts are inhibiting me from getting a restful sleep. And if I've talked about it, but that didn't work, what has helped me is I write it down. I get it out of my head and I write it on this notepad. And there's some stuff in there. I'll get it out of my head. I'll write it down, and then I won't visit it again for 2 or 3 days. And sometimes I'll open it up. I have no idea what I was jotting down. I have no idea what was going on in my head. I got it out of my head onto the paper, and I can literally close the book on it. And metaphorically, but figuratively as well, I'm getting it out of my head onto paper, and then I kind of feel like I've dealt with it. Where, will it rear its head later on? Maybe. I mean, I hope not. But having the conversation casually with somebody that you trust, somebody that you care about, somebody that understands, but also just literally getting those thoughts out of your head, so you write it down. It's helped me tremendously over the last few years, and I find that I do it less and less now. But every now and again, it's definitely something. If I'm not getting a restful sleep, it's because there's something that's kind of chipping away at me, and I need to address it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the research shows that physically writing something down on paper is hard to replace in terms of your brain processing it. And like talking about it is one thing, but I mean, that is an easy solution. If you don't feel like, if you're wrestling with something, you don't feel like there's anyone immediately that your workplace or your friend group or even your family that you can talk to, you can be alone in your private space, whip out a notepad and just start writing. And that will open up doors and a gateway for your brain to start, having an outlet for those thoughts and those, the things that they're wrestling with. And then I think it'll get easier and easier. And the next thing you know, you might find yourself talking to someone and talking about it out loud. And yeah, like I said, the research shows that physically writing down on paper is the best way for your brain to process those things. I can't remember what the exact references where I heard that or read that the other day, but I think it's pretty conclusive on that. And I mean, I do it all the time with my phone. If I'm out walking or driving, you take a voice note, open up the notes app on your phone, and you just start rambling. Just don't even try and make it concise. Just start writing what's going on in your head, and then you go back to it like a day later, or you don't go back to it, and then you'll rewrite it, and it'll be even more concise, and then you'll end up with. I mean, that's what I did for this podcast. I started. All these thoughts started running through my head after our first conversation when we were training, and I just started writing them down, and then it gets more and more clear, the conversation that's going on in your head, and less rambling. It's easier to make sense of it. And yeah, like you don't have to go and pay for a counseling session. You don't have to open up to someone at work. You can just start writing, and your brain will start working through that in probably the healthiest way.
I agree. I think it's great advice, and it does, kind of bridge the gap or segue nicely with, we as humans, we're very goal-oriented people, right? So when we have something to strive for, we become very motivated and we want to get after it. What I found with setting goals is, if I'm thinking it a fair bit, then it's probably something that I believe in, that I really want to tackle. And then when the thoughts help me formulate sentences, and then when I speak it, now it's gaining momentum. So I have the thought of whatever that goal might be. Then I've shared it with somebody that I care about and that I trust. And then when I write it down, man, it's got the full momentum to come to fruition. So think it, then speak it, and then write it down. Those three things in conjunction with each other makes it very powerful, and it becomes real. Like it's something that we can actually see come to fruition. So I think dealing with any pressures or mental health hiccups, it could be another way to tackle it. I think it's great advice. I mean, like neither one of us are psychotherapists or shrinks in any way, but I think based on experience, I can speak confidently with this stuff because I've had my struggles. I put practices and protocols in place that have helped me. And I can tell you, like, if it helps one other person that may be watching this or listening to this, then it's benefit added. And at the end of the day, it's just about making, a better society for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I am absolutely still figuring it out every single day. And there's no guidebook. We've just very recently in the grand scheme started as a society and in our workplaces and in the military and emergency services, putting a priority on mental health and acknowledging the issue that we have. And we're far from where we've got a lot of work ahead of us. But yeah, I think where I was going to go with this, but yeah, there's no guidebook. Like I've had to, even in my own workplace now, which has some great systems set up, but it's still really individual, person to person, and you have to really just go out on a limb and experiment and see what works for you. Like journaling and writing things down works for me. I've tried them, I've done mindfulness and meditation and counseling, and I've jumped between different counselors. And I mean, there's good evidence to show that, your relationship with your counselor is like your relationship with your friends. You may have to test a few out a few times until you really bond with a person. So you don't give up after one, because I've done that. I've gone and spoken to a counselor and said that was stupid, it was a waste of time, and then I've given up on it for a little bit until I'm hurting bad enough that I go back and try another one.
Yeah.
And you have to. I've been experimenting for 5 years with some of these things, like trying meditation, counseling, and journaling, and going for walks, and all of these things. And you just have to, like anything else, we know the principles that allow us to succeed in whether you're at the gym or a work project or academics. You have to put in lots of time and effort and work. And so it's the same principles for your mental health. You have to find a strategy that works for you. You have to put in the hours to fine tune it and get more and more efficient. It's not going to be just you go see one counseling session and you'll feel amazing after. There's going to be.
I agree, man. Ben, sorry to cut you off, but I agree with you 100% here. And it triggered something, and I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to jump in. Like the professionals, the true warriors, the guys that recognize that they want to get better. They want to get better. What pisses us off is the ones who will leverage a mental health day for their own benefit. And we, the ones that want to get better, we do not want to get associated with those people. And we know they're out there. We know they're out there, and we know that they take advantage of the system. And those people, piss us off, to be completely frank. So, where I'm going with that is we will only be a victim if we allow ourselves to be victimized. So if you want to get better, you're going to get better. You're going to find ways to own it. You're going to find ways to become one with it, accept it, and you're going to get better. Much like overcoming the common cold. It's possible. It might take a week. It might take 10 days. But if you want to get better, like most people do, who wants to wake up with a runny nose and, and they're sneezing and sniffles and whatnot? Nobody, right? Nobody. I don't know a single person that put their hand up for that. Well, it's no different. And I know mental health is a very complex subject, and I certainly don't want to oversimplify it, but I do believe to the core of my being, if you want to get better, you will own it, and we will find ways to fix it and rectify it. For those folks that just want to collect a paycheck and be the victim, man, I got no time for you. I don't. And, I may sound very hypocritical because I literally just 5 minutes ago talked about being empathetic, but there's a line. There's a line in the sand, man. I'm empathetic to those who want to get better. But for those of you that are out there that are just, gouging the system, man, I got no time for you. None. And I do believe, and I agree with you, find the mechanism that works, but we have to put the effort in. Just like lifting weights to grow big muscles, we got to put effort into the mental health as well.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to, you have to focus on yourself, and, people will always slip through the cracks. People will always abuse the system, and it's hard. I mean, I see that you see that in my workplace. People will always abuse the system, and it typically is a small fraction as well that will abuse the system to that degree. And so you have to, you kind of, it's hard especially if you see it a lot. It's right in front of you. It's hard to forget it, especially when, there's other people suffering and people that aren't using the system to their advantage that should. And then there's people that are abusing it. And I've been there when I've been frustrated by that, because like really good people suffer and don't get the help they need. And then the system kind of almost does more for the people that will take advantage of it. But yeah, like you said, it comes down to you have to take ownership over yourself, because like we're starting to get some in my own workplace, and we're starting to get some better things in place that support people to take the time they need and keep themselves healthy. But ultimately, no one's gonna look after you. Like, you have to take ownership for yourself. Yeah. And the minute you do that, it gets easier and easier. The minute, like, once I accepted that, like, and for a long time, I was extremely frustrated seeing good people get broken because they threw everything at the job, sacrificed their personal lives, their families and their children sacrificed. They missed so many important events because they were going above and beyond for the city's needs, and for people that I don't want to say don't deserve it, but people that were abusing the emergency services. And people, this good people we have would just throw everything at it and until they're broken. And our system in our workplace won't come after you and knock on your door at night and say, are you okay? Like, you have to do it yourself. And that extends to you. We have to look after each other, because everyone that's on the front lines, for lack of a better term, those are the only people that you can kind of rely on. The system will never go the extra mile to make sure you're okay. You have to decide that for yourself. And the minute I took ownership over that for myself, and all my frustrations kind of went away, I recognized that it was easier to stop getting fed up with, there's always negative things to focus on, and I could truly kind of let go and better myself. Yeah.
I agree. The system, it's imperfect, right? It's we're humans. We make mistakes. The system, the institution gets busy, and it's an imperfect system. I think gratitude goes a long way. I think, I've seen guys, and it's heartbreaking, man. I've seen guys at the unit, go through a couple of divorces, deploy, come home, deploy, come home. That repetitive cycle has worn them down, and they keep giving, they keep giving, they keep giving. But like we talked about earlier, that that cup analogy, as a tribe, they keep giving, they keep giving. Sometimes, literally, sometimes, a physical touch and an eye to eye thank you goes a long way. Like that expression of gratitude, like, man, I know you've been running hot. I want you to know you're appreciated. And if it wasn't for the effort that you're putting forward, this whole institution would not be running as smoothly as it is, because I've seen guys get to that point where they have nothing left to give. The cup is empty, the sponge is dry, and then they end up leaving. And I've witnessed it where it's the institution is busy. I get it, but there's a lack of compassion and a lack of gratitude demonstrated to that member who's literally given everything to the unit, everything. And, to me, that's heartbreaking, because it doesn't have to be the way. And, sometimes I've heard, it's just the unit's busy. Listen, man, if the unit is that busy that it cannot extend an element of gratitude to its member, then priorities are completely fucked. And that needs to be addressed. You're not that busy that you cannot take a moment to say thank you to somebody that's given everything that they possibly can to the organization. To me, no, that doesn't fly, man.
Yeah, because it's an investment. It's an investment the way you invest in the same breath that you invest funding, training to keep people performing the way they need to perform. Morale is a really underrated metric of performance and longevity of a team or an organization. Like, and it's cost free. Like, it doesn't. I could go on a huge rant about this in our own workplace, and I'm sure you've seen it. But if like during the pandemic or during the holiday season, when our call volume, or in the summertime, is through the roof, it's so bad you can't get people to come out for overtime shifts. If some of the leadership comes out and just shows their face and says, hey, what can we do to support you guys? How are you guys doing? Like, I don't think it's understood how much of a profoundly positive effect that can have on the team and the organization and efficiency of the people doing the work. Like, thank you for being here. Thank you for suffering. I'm out here away from the comfort of my home or from my office to say thank you for doing this work. Like, when I look back at the leadership and that I had and the different people, the best leadership, when I saw that they were on and they were working, I was like, oh, I gotta go. Like, it's time to, like, I'm instantaneously, my brain is switched on to a higher level of performance, because I know that this individual is standing behind me and is going to be there with me throughout that shift to get work done. And in the same way, when I had leadership that I know, like, was not invested in us or the work we're doing, never showed up to the hot calls, never followed up afterwards. I cared a lot about my job, but I kind of care a bit less about what happens.
Yep.
And all it takes is, like you said, someone checking in saying, hey, how can we support you? Thanks for going above and beyond. Thanks for throwing everything at this project and doing what we expect you to do, which is go above and beyond.
Yes.
It's such an underrated metric of performance and efficiency and keeping people in the organization healthy, because you don't do that, everyone's just going to run themselves into the ground, and you're not going to get the work done anyway. Like we don't skimp on training, we don't skimp on funding and all these other things. So why would we skimp on supporting the people emotionally?
I agree, man. That's a great example. And, there's some literature out there that I've read in the past, and it talks about where, true bonds are forged through hardship and through celebration. So when you have leadership who is suffering with you, when you have leadership who is celebrating with you, it goes a long way from a morale perspective. And, certainly this conversation is not designed to go political at all, but I can tell you, man, like I spent 16 years at the unit, and every prime minister at one point or another made a visit to the unit to express their gratitude, except for the current prime minister. And, it speaks volumes about his character. And this isn't, I certainly don't want to turn this into a political feat where I'm, casting shade, but I call a spade a spade. That man has not shown his face around the organization. That organization is the tip of the spear, and they're expected to do whatever the government asks them to do. The least you can do is to demonstrate a little bit of gratitude and respect and appreciation for what the guys are doing. And they're not getting it. And I'm telling you, the guys are getting fed up, and they're getting tired of a lack of support at the higher echelon level. And that morale is the difference between somebody sticking it out for another 10 years or somebody saying, you know what, I'm going to find something else to do. So yeah, gratitude, appreciation goes a long way. I agree with you 100%, man.
Yeah, and you invest so much in people, and what does it cost compared to everything else that you invest in people? What does it cost to show up and say a few words? And really, like, you don't even have to. I mean, I've seen this like in my own workplace, and I'm sure you've seen it. You don't even have to do anything other than show up and show your face. You don't actually have to award the new piece of equipment or the new funding. You just actually have to show up and talk and present yourself, and that costs you nothing other than a little bit of time. And so I don't understand. I mean, I think that comes with some detachment and dissociation, but I think that's what leads to that, especially as you climb the leadership ladder or whatever. You get further and further detached. It's harder to do that, but it costs nothing. And in the end, the people that are working for you are going to work that much harder and that much better, and it's going to make you look better in the end. So really, it's actually, even if you're selfish, it's an investment in yourself.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I would say the caveat to that would be, it's got to be genuine, right? It's got to be genuine. So,
because people will recognize if it's not.
100%. People are smart, man. Like they know they can read through the the fog when it's not genuine. But Ben, I know we're coming up on to an hour, and I know you have something else that you have lined up for this evening. So I really don't want to monopolize your time, but not to put you on the spot. If there was a piece of advice that you would provide one of your peers who is maybe going through a dark time, what would you share with that person?
Okay, I'll try not to tangent again. I got a few more minutes here, so I don't need to rush, but I think, and again, like it's hard. I've only ever worked in emergency services since I was a teen, essentially, and so I wanted to try and stay in my own lane, but also help make this information available to everyone, because everyone is dealing. It's all everyone has their own level of stress in their own life, and just because someone works in emergency services or works in the military and goes through these crazy events doesn't diminish what you're going through in your own personal life. And so I want that to be apparent as well. You don't have to be in the military, emergency services, or doing these crazy jobs to have huge obstacles and issues to overcome. I think taking ownership and taking ownership over yourself and recognizing that if like you will inherently know if you're not healthy, if you don't feel like yourself, if there's something off. And just if that is where you're at, if you feel like there's something off, you don't feel like yourself, you look back at the last few months or years and you've strayed from your friend group or your things that you used to do all the time, socializing, whatever it is, dive into that with every force of your being, because if you don't, it gets harder and harder to dig yourself out of that hole, and easier for your brain to go down these unhealthy patterns and thought patterns and these unhealthy voices in your head. And the the sooner and the faster you and the more aggressive you attack this thing, the better you'll feel, and the sooner you can get ahead of it. And I mean, every this is, again, like I said, this is a new issue that we're kind of dealing with as professionally in organizations and as a society, as mental health. And so I think you need to, look at whatever workplace you're in, whatever community you're a part of, see what's out there, recognize the certain issues that you're facing, and recognize that, like it's more than normal to feel overwhelmed all the time to any degree, at any level, no matter what you're facing. And I think like a good example of this is, I was reading about is in a book called Tribe, actually, by Sebastian Younger, I think is how you pronounce it. Really good book. He talks about 9/11, and I mean, New York City is everyone's grinding, everyone's kind of on the hard rat race. But when 9/11 happened, suicide rates and depression dropped way down afterwards, because people were forced to become a community and support each other and rebuild the city. And that's a testament to the power of a tribe or a community, or relying on your support group. And I think so. If you're dealing with something, look to your support group, look to your tribe, look to your community. That's the first step you can take, because people want to help. Like, when was the last time you helped someone you didn't feel good? If I wish my buddy had called me and I would have dropped everything that I was doing and been like, hey man, let's go get a coffee, let's go work out, but I had no idea, and so I didn't reach out. And people want to help all the time. Like when we had our newborn 6 months ago that had this crazy diagnosis, and I wasn't used to receiving help from people. I'm used to helping other people. And all of a sudden we had all these people coming to help us, and it felt weird I had to get used to accepting help. But once you do that, like people will reach out and go above and beyond. And then all of a sudden you have this amazing community, and you're like, oh yeah, I did need that help. I thought I could do it on my own, but I couldn't. I did need that help. And like we said, I think like if you have someone that you can talk to that is dealing with similar issues, just talk to them. Start writing it down if you need to. Start saying it out loud in a voice note on your phone. Just reach out to your people and talk about it, and check in on people. Because when I was in a dark spot, I didn't want to talk to anyone. I was doing things that would just continue to kind of keep me numb. And now that I've been in a much healthier place and had stepped away from work for a little bit, I call some of my buddies like almost every single day now, and I look forward to it. And it gives me so much. It gives me as much as it gives them. Yeah. Like you said, fills your cup. And now that I'm there, like I'm like, wow, I can't believe it took me so long to get to this point. I don't want to go back to where I was before, where I was only calling my buddies or seeing them every 6 months. I want to, I have that as a habit now, and I want to build a system that supports that rather than takes away from it.
Good for you. That's awesome. Yeah, that is very valuable information, and I'm glad you felt comfortable sharing it. And I agree, man. Like a quick text message, reaching out to somebody, a quick phone call to somebody, it could be the thing that lifts their spirits. But like you said, it's very reciprocal, because it also makes you feel good as well. So that's a good thing. Just sharing some positive vibes. It's a good thing.
Yeah, and it's small steps like everything else. We know you have to take small steps when you first get started at anything new, and you build that momentum, and it gets easier and easier and easier. You don't go to the gym and you don't bench 300 pounds the first time.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
and so it's the same thing with everything else. You just got to take small steps, and it gets easier and easier after you start.
Amazing. Love it. I love it, man. Well done, man. This is awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Ben. I could literally sit here and chat with you for another 2, 3 hours, I'm sure. This is good stuff. I really appreciate you reaching out and getting this off the ground. It's a tough subject to talk about, I think, for a lot of us, but the more we do, the more natural it becomes, just like anything. And I think you gave some great advice there, and I agree with you. Little steps, right? Like, we want to climb the staircase. We want to get to the next level. Well, it's one step at a time, and that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I this was definitely out of my comfort zone discussing this on a public platform, but again, it's my frustration is with seeing good people go by the wayside, and I know that part of the problem is not talking about it. And I have imposter syndrome. I don't think I'm qualified, or I've worked long enough to, speak on these issues. But again, if I then don't speak about it, I'm only contributing to the problem. So, I can't wait till I have whatever arbitrary amount of experience or seen so many calls or whatever to talk about it. You just got to start. We got to start doing it now to start fixing the problem, because again, it's on us to start the ball rolling.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. Awesome, buddy. On that note, man, we'll wrap it up for now. Thanks again. I appreciate it. I'm gonna hit stop here in a second, and then you and I can close it out. But for those that tune into the YouTube channel, keep the questions coming. This is all good stuff. Like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with somebody, because this conversation literally could help one. It could help thousands of people. So thanks a lot. Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
One more thing I just want to add is just some resources, just for anyone listening, is a really good resource if you ever need it is Boots on the Ground. It's like a 24/7 call line, voluntarily staffed, to my understanding, by I think veterans and first responders. You can call at any time and talk to someone anonymously. It's all kept confidential. So that's a good resource out there. And then Wounded Warriors Canada has a really good database for finding counselors and therapists that have some training with veterans and first responder specific issues. So you can check those out if you need it.
Amazing. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's good stuff. Right on. All right. Thanks a lot, Ben. I appreciate it, man. We'll chat again in the future, but thanks for tuning in. Thanks for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.